Tariffs are the hot topic of 2025. And with that in mind, welcome to this special bonus episode of This Week in E-commerce, where I will be interviewing Managing Director APAC of Global E, Stuart Smith. This Week in E-commerce with a special episode to talk about the de minimis exemptions and the recent US tariffs, which have been all over the news lately. And there was such great demand for the last interview, the last time I spoke about this, that I thought this time I'd bring in someone who is genuinely an expert rather than me just pretending to be one. And it is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast Stuart Smith, Managing Director of APAC of Global E.
Thanks, Mel. Appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'll make sure I send this podcast to my wife that I'm an expert.
Well, Stuart, just going through your history, you certainly are an expert when it comes to the logistics space. You're from DHL. You spent 12 years there, 13 years there, to then Ozpost, and now as managing director of Global E. You certainly have been in this area in the retail and supply and logistics space for a long time now.
Yeah, the grey hairs. I need to get a haircut this afternoon as well because the grey hairs do show that. Started out in freight forwarding years ago in customs clearance of all things, which this kind of really relates to. Worked way through into operations, and then with DHL the majority of the time. I was actually on the other side of the Pacific Ocean with DHL in New York for several years. So Section 321, the evolution of it, anyhow, was really prevalent when I was there during the second term of Obama. And that's when, they changed the de minimis rule. They've had the de minimis rule for quite a while. It's called Section 321. And the Customs Border Patrol kind of implemented for was kind of increase freight, but reduce the paperwork associated with it. During Obama's second term, though, the de minimis value was around $200. So
That's USD.
Yeah, USD. Solicited a lot of feedback and actually increased that to 800 USD, kind of in line with what Australia did without de minimis, which is 1,000 AUD. So it's really a tax exemption for shippers or brands into the US that allow, the US citizens to import, and the rule states one import per day of under 800 USD, and there's no associated duty with that shipment.
Why was it brought in? Like, if you can share some of the history around why they would implement something like this, what was the rationale behind allowing US citizens to be able to import foreign goods, and particularly Australian goods?
It's kind of, you got to have a bit of a history story on this one and kind of fast forward to see what Trump's doing. It was around just before the Second World War, after the First World War, there was a lot of trade wars going on, a lot of protectionism. And it created a heavy burden on the US customs at the time and was really restrictive on trade. So they tried to find or pay off a balance between putting protections in place for the US economy, but then not stifling the growth of the economy. So they came in with Section 321 and the de minimis, stayed at around 200 USD for a number of years until Obama came in. But then on average around that time when Obama was around the second term, there was about 10 to 15 million de minimis shipments per annum coming in. Over the journey between then and now, the de minimis was increased to 800. They estimated last year was about 1.3 to 1.4 billion shipments came in under the de minimis. Then Biden looked at kind of reducing that de minimis. There was actually a bill in front of Congress that had bipartisan support. They actually call it the Temu Sheen bill. So it's actually helped the rise of a lot of low value, high volume brand owners or, shippers into the US, which is obviously a massive market, not just for, China brands, but, global brands.
Because one of the challenges, though, is that with, I guess, it's not just targeting shipments coming from China, it's actually targeting shipments where the country of origin of the goods is from China. Is that correct?
Yeah, so country of origin, China and Hong Kong. Not that Hong Kong produces too much these days. So this is where I think it will evolve over the next couple of weeks or couple of months. Trump's also spoken about goods country of origin in Europe and the UK as well. We've seen what he's recently done in the past few days with the tariffs on aluminium and steel. But at the moment, it's purely focused on country of origin, China, Hong Kong. When, we're talking to the brands that we work with, and I'm sure it rings true for the majority of other brands in Australia, the supply chain, when they're sourcing, producing goods, I would say a large percentage, 75 to 90+% have China as a country of origin.
Yep. And in terms of the US tariffs, they're not just targeting China as well. They're also targeting Mexico and Canada as well, with even higher tariffs. I believe 25% coming from those countries. So triggering a bit of a trade war. What has actually been the push towards this? Because it's not, like, according to the press around it, it's not actually about reducing imports from those countries. They've actually stated some other reasons why.
Yeah, so it's interesting when you start to peel back the layers and look at some of the rationale behind it. Mexico themselves actually introduced an inbound tariff of 25 to 30% on fashion apparel goods. They cited, trying to protect their own apparel industry in Mexico. US themselves, they're talking, there's probably 3 or 4 key things they're talking about. First is around trade, economic policy, and what they call unfair competition. The US Retail Association was really damning and supported the bipartisan bill in front of Congress, trying to protect American jobs. And then I think one of the analogies used was, looking at a T-shirt, brought off an offshore brand or marketplace, what they can produce and send that for versus what, say, a Gap or Banana Republic would sell it for is a vast difference. So, it's causing issues with American jobs, creating an uneven playing field. Mm-hmm. Increased competition is definitely a big one. When you look at some of the platforms offshore and their cost base in what they're able to produce goods for versus in the US, and then US companies importing them under, the right regime and policy in the B2B world, it's unfair. And then, they were talking about labor violations potentially in those country of origins as well. President Trump has also cited national security reasons, fentanyl and goods coming in through particularly the mail channel. And then, one thing that, he has pushed also is they're losing a lot in tariffs. Whilst it has an impact potentially on, the shoppers, they're going to have to pay some more. They're losing billions in tariff revenues, as brands push stuff through that $800 Section 321 channel.
Yep. And also in terms of but because it's not just about Section 321 with the de minimis, this also has meant that just all goods, there's now the IEEPA, which is what this additional 10% also applies to an importer, someone importing, a bulk shipment from China as well. They would have to pay those duties and taxes, which I guess they had to anyway, regardless of that. So this is more targeting the consumers who will no longer be able to bring that in. What are the impacts then for Australian retailers who have been shipping to the US, who have customers in the US?
Yeah, so there's a few. In Trump's first term, he also implemented tariffs on goods that were made in China. The de minimis kind of masked those quite a bit because a lot of the goods were coming under, so it didn't apply. With the changes, there's a few subtle changes underneath the Section 321 as well. Normally, goods under $2,500 were cleared on what we call an informal clearance. Over $2,500, goods needed a formal clearance, which obviously more paperwork, more due diligence, particularly from the shopper where they'd have to share their social security number. That number's now been reduced from $2,500 to $250. So it really falls into where the AOV of the brands are. So they're under the 250 USD. It's still an informal clearance, even when Trump reinstates the removal Section 321. They'll have the original duty from, I think it was 2016, 2017, plus the additional 10%. Actually, you can get on TikTok and have a a look. A lot of American shoppers are now, taking screenshots and, where's this duty coming from? I've never seen this before.
No.
They're not used to shopping that way. You think about their retail experience. They would go into a store, buy the goods, and when they get to the checkout, they're paying sales tax. So that's what they're used to. In Australia and Europe, we're used to just paying everything all in. This is a completely new experience for them. So there's going to be upheaval. What a few Australian brands have done in the interim before the pause, some were looking to absorb that duty amount to keep that seamless customer experience until they kind of decided on a longer term plan. But what we found with probably the next two cohorts of customers, what they did is a cohort of customers forced the duty amount at checkout, which was, a lot of those TikToks you might see where, it's sticker shock for those shoppers. They haven't seen that before. Probably the most prevalent and one that reduces the conversion would be embedding the duty in the price of the goods. So when the shopper's browsing, what they see is what they get when they get to the checkout. And then they're just paying the applicable state sales tax, which is a like-for-like experience in-store, online, domestically for them.
And when you talk about the increased prices which they're seeing, like in what sort of range are we talking about here?
Yes, so you're looking with the previous tariff, the new 10% tariff, you're looking on average about 30 to 35% increase.
That's a significant amount. So someone selling, let's say, a T-shirt into America at like $50 USD, suddenly that's looking from $50 USD, which is, not inexpensive for a T-shirt. Suddenly that same T-shirt is costing close to $80 USD now.
Yeah, so a couple of things brands can possibly do to offset this. Look at, and it all gets back to what they want their customer experience to be. That should be the overarching principle. So they can look to optimize the pricing and then look how they offset that duties and tax. Do they fully pass it on or partially absorb that? That's great. Good experience. You'll get some shoppers that will see a slight increase in price, but, it won't affect conversion too much. From a bottom line perspective, affect the brand's profitability.
And that's something which I saw today, actually. There was one brand which posted, Sarah Timmerman from Beginning Boutique, posted that she was looking to absorb all of the duties and taxes into their price and wasn't without making a price rise.
Yeah, so that's for me, that's customer first. You put the customer first, they will understand, appreciate it, and then you're building brand loyalty.
Yeah. But at the same time, though, it's like, like you said about the bottom line, you need to make sure you have the margins to be able to absorb that as well.
Yeah, you can offset that, though, with, looking at growing into other markets. So I don't know about, you talking to brands, but a lot of the brands we speak to, US is anywhere 40+% of their overall market. It's a great opportunity looking to other markets where you can take you can probably be more profitable in those other markets and offset the US. Yep. Middle East is a great example where shoppers there will typically, the items per cart and the AOV will typically be 20 to 30% higher than the rest of the world. So, is that a growth opportunity for brands to potentially make more profit there and offset the US?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you mentioned the Middle Eastern markets. Are there any other markets which you would suggest would be a good fit for Australia? Typically, from my experience, most brands will try to target the English-speaking markets first because they feel that is more translatable there. But have you seen from your experience and the number of brands who you work with globally, where there are some regions which have a bigger appetite for Australian-made products or Australian-sold products, I should say?
So Australia is number one from a brand perspective globally, no matter where you go. There's probably a couple of fundamental things I think about from a brand perspective around your product, and then the messaging and the brand awareness. So is your product appropriate for that market? So there might be some products that are not appropriate, say, for the Middle Eastern market for certain reasons, and whether they be cultural or religious compared to others. Can you replicate the value of that product you have in the Australian market in the destination markets? Can you transfer that value to the shoppers? And then you overlay the macroeconomic conditions in those particular regions. There's no point selling into a market if it's gone backwards, 10% year on year. So you're just throwing good money after bad. What we're seeing, start with English speaking markets for sure, Europe, UK, kind of spread from there, Middle East. There are some Southeast Asian markets, which whilst they're going backwards year on year, there's still growth opportunities there. So there's several factors you would want to think about before, looking to grow. And then every market is different from a regulatory perspective, payments, shopper behavior, and then, taking all that data and trying to make a good decision.
And most of the impacts we've been talking about is there'll be an impact on export sales, so sales going out of the country. Is there any potential impact of this change, though, for Australian brands who are buying from China, who are importing their products from China?
Yes, most definitely. It started with the US. Now, you want to see how this escalates in other markets. What a lot of brands are now starting to do, if you think about it, from an up the supply chain and upstream and downstream, upstream being where you're sourcing, producing your products and the lead time there, they're looking to diversify for sure. So looking at other markets. And then you got to look downstream, what the downstream markets are doing from a regulatory perspective. So there will be challenges for brands in terms of diversifying and de-risking their supply chains.
Yeah, and that's something which I think a lot of the bigger brands have been doing for quite a while. I know that brands like Nike have recently come out and said actually it will have very little impact on them because they get everything from, China's only one small part of the supply chain. But I find that particularly with the SME market here in Australia, China is still where the vast majority of manufacturing is occurring.
Yeah, so you look at the reporting of a lot of the retail brands that are listed on, the New York Stock Exchange, that they've all actually got a lot around diversifying their supply chain. Australian brands have been a little bit slower in doing that. I think there's a comfort level in brands procuring from China. Costs are increasing there, but, in terms of the quality of what's coming out there and, kind of the ease for us to access the market, it makes it really easy. And then you look in and the infrastructure they've got is almost second to none. You look at some of the other potential markets where brands can source from, the infrastructure is not there. And then there's a wild fluctuation in the quality of the goods that are produced. So that's why I think China will still be a large percentage of where Australian brands procure from, but that diversification is going to be key.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing as well is that in the last couple of years with some US brands I've worked with before, they shifted their manufacturing from China to Mexico. And so now they're kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place now.
Yeah, look, it was easy from a logistics perspective, great infrastructure. They could inject, over the border. And then in terms of the labor quality in Mexico was good. Same with the production quality. So Trump has and will change that. So it's going to force brands to probably, his ultimate aim is to look to onshore production. But in the end, we suffer the same problem here in Australia. When you look at labor, the cost of labor, cost of materials, it's going to be challenging.
Now, Winston Churchill famously said, you never let a good crisis go to waste. What do you think are the opportunities which this has potentially opened up for Australian retailers?
So I think optimization in their existing market, being the US, what do you do from your pricing around duties? I think logistically, there's big opportunities to, refine what they're doing to gain efficiencies. Do Australian brands look to open US fulfillment locations? That could potentially create, another problem that they'll have to solve for is, hey, I'm going to need X amount more inventory I'm going to have to hold in the US.
Been there, done that.
They create profits for me in terms of cost. But then with these new tariffs there's an extra 10% I'm going to have to pay out on the B2B import that's going to be held up in stock on a shelf. So my cash flow is going to be restrained. But from a CX perspective, hey, I can get it to Mel next day or, within 2 days, more economically. I think looking to leverage some free trade agreements. So we have a free trade agreement with the US. Can brands, depending on their AOV, ensure production again and leverage that? And then, look at what they can do around bundling products. Are there other regions that might have good duty friendly relationships with the US? Leverage those as well.
Yep. And let's talk about Global E for a second. And where does Global E fit into all this? For obviously, I've been familiar with the brand Global E for a number of years now. And Global E are partnering with a lot of retailers to help them with their cross-border activities. How is Global E now helping retailers kind of navigate this new reality which we're living with?
Yeah, so we're kind of in the middle for brands and helping them through the regulatory piece for the US specifically. But from how do we help brands? So from an end-to-end transaction between them and the shopper, depending, no matter what region they're in, we help them with messaging specific for markets. In terms of the merchant of record, around the duty, regulatory, tax for each country. And, there's 213 country brands shipped to with us globally. They all have a different regime. Think about the US in isolation. So the duty element is a federal program. So that's one. Underneath that, the change from a informal to formal clearance has changed as well, that 250 level. You overlay that with the state sales tax regime. There's, 45 states that charge state sales tax as well. So if you're a brand looking to manage that yourself and you've scaled, that's 46 different tax regimes you need to manage. You throw Europe on top of that, even intra-Europe, if brands have a fulfillment center in Europe and they're shipping within the EU, the 27 state members of the EU, if you're managing it yourself, you have to file that in 27 states.
Yep.
So it starts to add up. We take care of all that responsibility as merchant of record. In terms of payment options, we help brands with, over 150 payment options globally. Fraud, is a big issue. So, we guarantee that for brands. And then, returns, we help work with brands on their logistics and returns optimization.
Yeah, and particularly being the merchant of record now, you kind of take away a lot of that headache in terms of who then needs to deal with the customer on those duties and taxes issues.
Yeah, at a high level, last year there were about 50 regulatory changes globally, just at a high level. So we manage all of that and take full responsibility. So, brands don't need to worry about, what it is in Chile or the US or, UK, Europe or, Malaysia who implemented a GST last year.
So finally, Stuart, where do you see this heading? Like, is this just the beginning? We were talking earlier about how Trump made these decisions very quickly. We knew that something like this could happen, but for it to happen with just with a flick of the wrist, and a signing of an executive order, it then came into place practically overnight. Where is this heading? Like, obviously, the de minimis has been temporarily reinstated as well. Like, what's next? Like, when do you think that they'll be unreinstating it and taking it off the table again? And then beyond that, is there further tariffs likely to happen? Obviously, we talked about the Australian imports, steel imports, as well, now having a tariff affecting sales there. Like, where do you see this heading?
Yeah, so this is my personal opinion. I believe it will happen on or around the 1st of March that it will be reinstated. And my rationale thought process behind it is how a lot of de minimis shipments were being entered into the US were through the postal channel. So China Post, Hong Kong Post, and including Australia Post would send stuff through the postal channel. It will get cleared and then USPS would deliver it. That's the bulk of the orders coming in, and the US wasn't ready for that. Both USPS and CBP in putting infrastructure in place to record it, calculate it, and collect it. So I think they'll need time to do that, which would be the start of March. I think once they put that in place, they'll reinstate it. Then where do we go from here? Bit of a crystal ball. I think this will escalate and grow. At the moment, country of origin, China, Hong Kong. I do think that will be expanded. And again, my personal opinion, I think it's a strategy of President Trump to get people to the table to talk, in more general terms around how they can work. And, he's really putting in his mind in the American economy, America first.
Well, all a lot which we need to keep an eye on over the next few weeks and months.
Yeah, most definitely. And look, if I can offer any advice to brands, is just reach out to your trusted advisors, whoever they may be. Stay close to the news and look at plan B, C, and D, and have those contingencies in place, ready to go.
Great advice, Stuart. Thanks for your time.
Not a problem. Thanks, Mel. Cheers.